one of the characteristics of a biological community. The question can also come in a manner where they can ask which of the following is not a characteristic of a biological community. Okay, sex, mortality rate, natality rate, or something else. So there it will be sex because it is for an individual, but ratio is for a population. Similarly, mortality is for an individual, rate is for a population. Natality is for an individual, natality rate is for a population, and stratification is again a characteristic, is not a characteristic of biological community, but it is the way different organisms are distributed vertically in a ecosystem, right?
Yes, sir. Okay,
yeah.
sir. Understood.
Is it clear? So sometimes
Yes, sir. Clear.
sometimes very simple questions can be confusing, right? So just pay attention, just read the question 2 or 3 times and you will realize, oh, it was asking something I already know. Okay, since we started with this, anyone else has any doubts with respect to the test paper? Arpit, Abia, Fatima?
No, sir.
No? Okay, cool. So let me stop sharing this. Let me share the notebook. So what we'll do today is just for a quick summary, I'm opening this notebook and someone can just give me the quick summary of the foundation, and rest of the chapter will complete or will go over through the NCRT. So I'll share NCRT and we'll go through the NCRT. Me and Arpit did it one time, and for simpler chapters that works faster and better. So you all can open your books with you. I think Arpit would have remembered that. I think it was just me and Arpit in that class. Oh, it was the Christmas day. And I apologized to Arpit for holding the class. Yeah. Okay, so a quick summary. Anyone? Quick summary of the ecosystem. Anyone would like to give a quick summary? Fatima or Abia? Kulsum has also joined. Good evening, Kulsum. Am I audible, people?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so Fatima, would you like to give a quick summary?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so ecosystem, we have first divided the word. Eco means interaction or relationship. Then system means systematic or in a periodic or rhythmic manner. Ecosystem is the functional unit of nature. Ecosystem means where a any living organism interacts with a non-living organism.
Yeah.
And also with the physical environment of the non-living organism. Ecosystem is divided into two different.
There can never be a non-living organism, if you notice.
Sorry.
There can be a non-living factor. Yeah, a non-living factor or abiotic factor. So organisms are always living. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so terrestrial, aquatic. Terrestrial, there is example for terrestrial ecosystem is forest, deserts, or grassland. Example for aquatic is marine water, seas, oceans, salt lakes, ponds, etc. Aquatic is again divided into two. One is freshwater and marine water. Marine water, there is seas, oceans, and salt lakes. And freshwater, there is ponds, lakes, and rivers.
Correct.
And then we discussed about the components of ecosystem. There are 4 components of ecosystem: productivity of ecosystem, decomposition of ecosystem, flow of energy, nutrient cycle.
Correct. Then we talked about stratification, right?
Yes, stratification means the vertical distribution of different species of organisms, which occupy different levels in any ecosystem.
Correct.
In productivity of ecosystem, solar energy is the constant source of energy for every ecosystem. Means any production will be starting from the sun. So that's why it is called the primary producer.
Yeah, it's the production is not starting from the sun. Production is starting from plants, primary producers, but the energy for driving that chemical reaction is coming from sun in the form of heat and light energy. Then that heat and light energy is getting trapped. Mostly the light energy is getting trapped by the plants or the primary producers and is used into chemical reactions. So the production is starting from the primary producer. Sun produces nothing except for radiation.
So production starts from primary producer, which is plants, and they get their energy from the sun.
Correct. Right.
Then we discussed about GPP and NPP. GPP is gross primary product, which is the rate of total production of an organic matter during photosynthesis. And NPP is it is calculated by GPP minus the respiratory losses. The NPP is passed on, and the GPP. No, one second. Yeah, the NPP is passed on. The GPP is the total production of organic matter from which the plant uses 10% for itself.
Yeah, that's it's a rough estimate. It's not true that, but anyways, yeah, because so you have to understand that plant does not uses all of it. Plant also wastes a lot of things through respiratory losses, right? Or through seeds or through fruits. So these things are flowers. So when any plant produces flowers, flowers are not forever, or leaves. So you can realize that there's a lot of tissue degeneration and new tissue formation happening in plants as well. And as I told you earlier when we started the course, that there's a difference between animals and plants, and that is that plants continue to grow throughout their life, right, till they die. But animals do not have a continuous growth. They reach a optimum maximum size and weight, and then they stop growing, right? But plant continue. So that's where some part of their energy that they are producing always goes. Okay. And also is lost through respiratory losses. So in class 11th, you remember studying plant physiology, and there you must have studied respiration in higher plants, correct? Where you see how glucose molecule is broken down by glycolysis without using oxygen, and then through the electron transport chain by using oxygen, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what the loss I'm talking about, because at the end of this respiratory process, CO2 is released along with water. So water and CO2 goes out, and both have mass. So you can imagine that a glucose is taken in, energy is produced from that, and then some mass or biomass is released from the living system. So that is the respiratory loss. So NPP is what is present in the plant that is passed on to the heterotrophs. Okay. So the available biomass for the consumption of heterotrophs. Make sense, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Fatima. So for further discussion in this chapter, today I've decided to share the NCRT and go through that. So I hope you all can see the NCRT. Can you see this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So please, everyone, open your books in front of you, because in this chapter there are certain things which I wanted to focus more on discussing and making you mark things from the book so that we can save some time in dictations and pay more time to understanding the concept. So there are not many important concepts in this chapter, but there is what we're going to cover in today's class is the major concept. Okay. So we are done with production. So productivity of, so remember I said that for every ecosystem, it has to take care of its need. It has to produce what it needs. So that is done. I also told you that a system has to decompose as well, right? It has to decompose what it has produced. And why is that decomposition important? That is important because if you do not decompose, then the earth is not unlimited, the earth is limited. So a one way, if you do not decompose and bring back, it will become a one way road of productivity, right? It is true that you get almost unlimited supply of energy from the sun. So the only thing in this whole system we can take as unlimited is the sun, which again is not unlimited due to weather conditions. So as the earth moves around the sun, we know that there are different seasons, right? And depending on different seasons, temperature fluctuation and also the availability of daylight, it fluctuates, correct? So even though sun is constantly up there, still the sunlight availability to the plants can vary, okay, depending on seasons to season. So in a way, nothing is completely unlimited. So that's why it's important to decompose the raw materials, decompose the organic matter, make it into raw materials and bring it back to the producers. So if you see here, so there are specific organisms which break, so they are called decomposers, which break down the complex organic matter into organic substances like carbon. If you can see, you all can see my cursor.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the decomposers, as you can see, which break down organic matter into inorganic substances, for example, CO2, water, iron, nitrogen, etc., calcium. That process is called decomposition. Okay. Now, every living system dies. Similarly, plants also die. So these leaves, barks, flowers, all the dead remains. So I told you that flowers don't stay forever. Fruits don't stay forever. Even the leaves don't stay forever. They fall and sometimes plant get them back in the new season. So all these serve as the raw material for decomposition, and it is called a detritus. So leaves, bark, flowers, dead remains of animals, including the fecal matter, all of it is called detritus. So this can be asked. So just note it down or just mark it in your books. What is a detritus? So detritus is a raw material for decomposition. Any dead part of a plant or an animal or the fecal matter, all are called detritus. What will not be called a detritus? Any example? What we cannot call a detritus?
Plastic.
Yes, we will not call plastic a detritus because that is not degraded by these decomposers. Okay. Or thermosettings, the thermosetting things that we use in our home that was used before. Now there is remoldable plastic, but before there was lots of thermosettings used, thermosetting plastic, if you know about it, right? Now the most important steps in the process of decomposition are these four: fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, okay, and humification and mineralization. Humification and mineralization are really connected to each other. Rest, fragmentation, leaching, and catabolism are separate things, and it is not a series. So often students confusingly take this as a series, that first fragmentation will happen, then leaching will happen, then catabolism will happen, and then humification. It's not like that. All of these processes can simultaneously take place in the process in this overall process of decomposition. Okay, so we'll study all one by one. So first, talking about fragmentation. So the organisms that break down detritus are called detritivores. Carnivores, herbivores, similarly detritivores. They feed on the detritus. So they're called detritivores. The best example is earthworm. And the simple breakdown of this detritus into smaller particles, physical breakdown, like we put food inside our mouth and we chew it. So chewing helps in the physical breakdown of the food. Okay, so our teeth do not have any, our teeth are not adding any enzyme or doing any chemical reaction, though we have saliva in our mouth. So there is enzymes in our earthworm's body. But apart from that enzymatic, yes, Arpit, please.
Sir, I wanted to ask, like, what is the difference between the scavengers and detritivores?
Yes, good question. Very good question. So scavengers, you will see, or scavengers, the term scavengers is used for higher organisms, basically, who are in a predatory chain, but they do not hunt themselves most of the time. Okay. And they rely on stealing the hunt of some other apex predator, or they look for any animal that has died on its own. So you will see that the apex predators, they have a behavior, a behavioral habit, that if an organism has died, you know, they will not eat it if they have not killed that organism. So if an organism is dying and decomposing, the body is decomposing already. So the lions, the tigers, cheetah, jaguar, they will not go and eat it, right? But those who will eat it are called scavengers, like vultures, you know, wild dogs, hyenas, they are scavengers. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Detritivores, on the other hand, we use it for lower organisms, for example, earthworms, fungi, bacteria, like basically saprophytes and these decomposers, which grow on that dying organic matter, degrading organic matter, and break it down into inorganic particles or smaller.
So the scavengers also do the same thing. Like, do they break down into simpler
but they eat
particles?
They digest it in their body. They don't throw it. It's not like a hyena chews down the flesh and throws it out. But earthworms break it down and throw it back into the soil.
Okay, got it.
So does fungi do. Fungi digest their food outside the body and then take some in. Rest is left there only. Okay. Bacteria also release certain chemicals which start degrading the organic matter outside. Okay. So scavengers eat. They eat the dead remains. Okay. That's the difference. Is the difference clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, it's clear.
Good. So fragmentation is just the physical breakdown, okay, of any detritus. Now comes leaching. Okay. As I told you, fragmentation and leaching are not related to each other, but oftentimes it happens in the nature that when detritus is fragmented, it makes it easier to leach down. So leaching is where the water soluble nutrients which are present in that detritus can get dissolved into the water, and with the water dissolved in it, they can percolate down into the soil. Okay. And they get and as they are going down into the soil acts as a sieve. Okay. And through that, some things which are not water soluble, some things which are macro, bigger in size, they can stay in that soil. But other things which are soluble in water, for example, salts, they can go seep inside and go into the soil there. And then they are not available to the organisms living on the surface or outside. So that is leaching. Okay. So in leaching, water soluble inorganics. So what you have to remember is water soluble and inorganic nutrients. Okay. So bacteria and fungus mainly use enzymes, as I told you, to degrade detritus into very simple organic substances. So from here, so is fragmentation clear first of all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Leaching is also clear. Some fragmentation does helps in leaching, but it's not like if there is no fragmentation, there will be no leaching. Sometimes the leaching and fragmentation happens simultaneously. Third is catabolism, and as you know, the word catabolism comes from, it is a subpart of metabolism, and metabolism is a characteristic feature of every living system, right? That's how we define life from non-living components. So bacteria and fungi, which are again detritivorous, decomposers, so they can produce enzymes, and these enzymes degrade the detritus into simpler substances through chemical reaction. The difference between fragmentation and catabolism is that fragmentation is physical breakdown, catabolism is chemical breakdown. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Yes. So when an earthworm is eating the detritus, at the same time, the fragmentation is happening and the catabolism is happening, because inside the earthworm's gut, there are enzymes. Okay. So same. Fragmentation, catabolism is happening simultaneously, and when the earthworm again excretes out the broken down, undigested things back in the soil, leaching is also happening at the same time. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
It's just that there are small differences in all these processes, which are chemical and biochemical in nature. The fourth one, which is called humifications and mineralization, that happens when once this detritus is in the soil, and the rate of degradation of that detritus is very, very slow. Okay. So all these above three steps can happen simultaneously, but humification is very slow. And if we come here, you will realize, can you see what, can you see this, people?
Yes. Sir.
So it says that humification leads to accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance. So you have to remember this, that it is dark colored and it is amorphous substance. And the another important thing about this substance is that it is highly resistant to microbial action. Okay. And it's called humus. So you must have heard or read in your junior classes that adding humus to a soil makes a soil more fertile. Have you read this?
Yes. Sir.
A soil which is rich in humus is a very fertile soil. Now my question is why? So I'm saying that it is,
Sir,
yeah, yes, Arpit.
so because it acts as a biofertilizer and increases yield.
But why? We are saying that it's highly
So it
resistant to
can,
micro. Yes. Yes,
allow, I mean, it can increase the water consumption. It can,
what
it
consumption?
It has water retaining capacity.
can hold more water.
It can hold more water is one thing. Okay, that's cool. But how is it helping just by holding water? So there are soils which hold the most water, like you know, clay. But clay is not a good source to. It's not a very fertile soil, though it can hold the most water. It is better used to make pottery, but it's very difficult to sow crops in that, right? There is
Because
certain,
the plant cannot take, the plant is not able to take it from the clay.
from clay. But that's what, why it's not able to take it from clay. Or my question is water, increasing the water retention capacity always good? It is good to some extent, which humus very correctly imparts that property to soil. But apart from that, it is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Okay, so this is the reason. It acts as a long-term fixed deposit kind of a thing for a plant. Now remember, it is a detritus only. Humus is a detritus. It has nutrients logged in it. But the problem is any bacteria or any enzyme cannot break all of humus down at once. Okay. So it takes a very long time for these bacteria to degrade the humus. Okay.
So
And yes,
the humus is the vermicompost.
humus is not exactly the vermicompost. Vermicompost is the manure. So there are terms like manure, fertilizers, humus, and detritus. Often people think all are same, but all are not same. Detritus is that has a potential to get degraded by detritivores. So from your dead and decaying remains of living systems to peels, vegetable peels, and everything that you put in a vermicompost comes under detritus. Vermicompost is, there are two terms. Vermi means worms, compost means you are making these detritivores break down the detritus, and whatever is left, you want to accumulate it. So normally in the soil, you will never find a very rich concentrated source of detritus present in a small pit, because in a forest or anywhere in the ecosystem, organisms just die scattered everywhere. They don't come to a pit and die. All the vegetable, plants, dead remains of animals will not come on their own into a pit and fall. Okay, and then earthworms will also come and fall there. So it's an artificial system that we create, where we put the detritus in a pit and we put detritivores, and then the breakdown happens, and that soil is not actually soil. It is what we get out of a vermicompost is a very, very rich manure that you can take, and now you can spray it in your plants in the fields, and that will increase the fertility of the land because it has lots of nutrients there. So vermicompost, detritivores is clear.
In that case, the earthworm are doing the same thing. What are they doing exactly?
Yes, they're doing the same. Earthworms always will do the same thing. They will break down the detritus, but there we are giving them a concentrated detritus collected from kitchen, from wastes from the plants, our vegetable peels, fruit peels, leftover from the kitchen, our food.
Yes.
We put all of it in the soil, put some earthworms and cover it, and
So
let them do their work. So the same. Humus is a amorphous substance, which is if you'll touch humus, it will be very, very hard to touch sometimes. Okay, and it will absorb water slowly and store that water. So it's like a dark colored amorphous substance, harder in nature, which won't be very easily, and they will be big chunks. So earthworms won't be able to eat humus. You need to break it down, and they don't have a hammer and a nail with them to break it down. And bacteria and other microbes very slowly can degrade humus. So humus acts as a fixed deposit of nutrition in the soil. So very slowly over time, if you have X amount of humus in the soil, it has a slow rate of decomposition. So slowly nutrients will keep on releasing in the soil. So that gives the soil a longer fertility life. Okay. Is that clear? Yeah.
Yes.
And this slow degradation of humus, due to which nutrients are unlocked and are given to the soil, is called mineralization. So the humus degraded by microbes and release of inorganic nutrients is known as mineralization. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah. So all these four things clear about decomposition?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So if you see this cycle, it is a representation of a decomposition cycle in terrestrial ecosystems. If everyone can see this, I hope you all can see this.
Yes, sir, we can see.
Yeah. So can anyone explain me, based on the above discussion, what's happening in this in this very simplified version. Arpit, would you like to explain this? Are you there, Arpit?
Yes, sir. I'm
Yeah.
analyzing it right now.
Yeah, let's start with the tree. Yes, you can take, everyone can take 2 minutes. Look at it. You can start from anywhere. Let me see. So basically it should start from tree because this is the primary producer, right? In ecosystem, the shortcut or the idea is to always pick the primary producer and begin from there. So because it's a cycle, you start from anywhere, you will come back to the same. But it's always good to start from the origin if you can track down an origin, and primary producer is the origin.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So like the trees which has been shown here like has been grown in the organic rich soil, and what happens is the fully grown trees from there, so a green leaf falls to the ground. So when it falls, then there is an action of a decomposer such as earthworm, which decomposes the fallen leaf, and then it converts into the organic rich soil.
Earthworms never eat leaves if you pay attention. This is something else. I think you're talking about this, right?
Yeah. Yes, I'm talking about this.
So who eats leaves? Have you seen any earthworm eating leaves? Like I have not seen earthworms eating leaves.
Caterpillar.
Yes.
Caterpillar.
Yeah, it can be more, probably it can be a caterpillar, but not an earthworm. Both look the same, worm-like. So earthworms are detritivores. Okay. So unless and until that leaf has started to degrade, okay, and it's dead, earthworms won't eat it. And most of the time you will see earthworms not crawling on the surface except for the rainy seasons when their burrows get filled with water, so they have to come up to breathe because they cannot breathe underwater. So apart from that, you will see always earthworms wriggling inside the soil, right? And a leaf falls on the ground or is on the tree or somewhere. So it can most probably be a caterpillar. And what are these all arrows going in all directions telling you?
Energy flow?
Yes.
The sequence.
Sequence of?
The sequence of energy flow.
More, you're right, because it can also be called an energy flow, but it is telling you in the cycle, there can be other modes where this leaf can go. So leaf basically, whether it's on the tree or when it falls from the tree, it enters the food web. So one thing is it can be eaten by the caterpillar. Another thing is it can be eaten by a higher. So this arrow, which goes to nothing, is a higher herbivore. But herbivory or herbivorous organisms then will be eaten by carnivorous, or they have to die. So, and this diagram does not talks about that. So it has left this arrow unattended for anything else apart from the caterpillars or the detritivores. So one is the caterpillar, when it eats it or leave it half eaten, then Arpit would continue.
So then this half-eaten leaves, they begin to form litter, and then they are further decomposed by the earthworms into soil. So like this cycle happens, and then again the trees grows from it.
Yeah, so basically you can see that either this leaf can degrade on its own over time because it's dead with bacterial or due to chemical actions, and some nutrients directly go into the soil which makes the soil organic rich, or it can go to other decomposers like fungi, where this mushroom is there, and bacteria that will start degrading it. And once it will degrade, then that will go for the decomposition by earthworms. So earthworms start eating anything which is on the soil or partially mixed with the soil. And finally, either through this way or directly, or finally through herbivores eating it and then they dying and coming back, it has to come back to the soil only. Okay, so the soil will be organic rich, and then that organic rich soil, will go back to a primary producer as raw nutrients. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Cool. So that's all about decomposition. Okay. And so I would like someone to read this last paragraph from here, decomposition. Anyone? Fatima, would you like to read this? It has some important facts that you should know, and while you read, all of us will hear. It's self-explanatory, very simple. Fatima?
Can I?
Yes, you can, Arpit. No problem. Thanks.
Decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. The rate of decomposition is controlled by chemical composition of detritus and climatic factors. In a particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water-soluble substances like sugar.
Yeah, is it clear to all of you? Is that clear? Why is it so?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it is so because anything which has very difficult substances in it, like chitin and lignin and chitin are very hard to decompose. That's why they also act as cell walls of fungi, and chitin acts as chitin is present in the exoskeleton of insects. Lignin is present in the protective parts of the trees, the bark. So these are difficult to degrade. So if a detritus is rich in these compounds, its decomposition will be very slow. But if a detritus is something which is just nitrogen based or nitrogenous waste, for example, any fecal matter of any organism or a sugar substance, then that will get decomposed very, very quickly. Okay, yes, next.
Temperature and the soil moisture are the most important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effects on the activities of soil microbes.
Yes. So here you have to, what you have to remember is this can be asked as a neat question. So mark it that temperature and soil moisture is a very important factor for decomposition. Okay. Because, and probably the most important, because not that it affects the detritus directly, but it affects the soil microbes which do the decomposition. So if the environment is warm and moist, it will allow more growth of these microbes, correct? So warm and moist environment is the best for a bacterial growth or a fungal growth. If it is very cold and dry, like in winters you will not see bacterial growth happening that fast in nature, or fungal growth happening. So most of the fungal growth happens during the warm and damp weather, correct? Is that clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Continue, Arpit.
Warm and moist environment favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobics inhibit decomposition, resulting in buildup of organic materials.
Yes. And so this term, anaerobiosis, is where anaerobes are growing, or there is an anaerobic condition where oxygen is not present. So decomposition is largely an oxygen requiring process. If you remember, when we were doing biotechnology, in its application, I told you about that we use biotechnology to also treat the sewage, right? Solve the problem of the sewage treatment in big cities. So we make these big sewage treatment plants where we use the same criteria. We allow oxygenation in that very big bioreactor chamber, which mixes oxygen and increases the number of aerobes, and the anaerobic bacteria or anaerobes which are growing in that sewage then depletes in number. And as the oxygen will increase, remember what used to happen? So sewage water had a high BOD or a low BOD, if you remember quickly.
The high.
High BOD, which means does it have a low oxygen, dissolved oxygen, or high dissolved oxygen?
Low.
Low, almost nil. So there is no dissolved oxygen present inside it. That's why it is toxic, because no decomposition can happen in a sewage water. If you want to make things decompose, you have to, from outside, put oxygen in it and start the aeration. So that aeration will allow aerobic bacteria to come and use that oxygen to break down the organic matter. So decomposition is also just breaking down of organic matter. To break down any organic matter effectively, you need oxygen. Okay, oxygen is a very, very reactive molecule. And the way we biologists look at oxygen at a fundamental level, it's not that. It is hard to imagine oxygen as an enemy. But oxygen is not a true friend of living systems. It is a, what do you say? It is a trade. So multicellularity did a trade with oxygen. It accepted oxygen because through oxygen you can break down substances which you could not break down before inside your body and get more energy. But there is something, the life evolved. When we talk about life, the first organisms that evolved, they were all anaerobes because there was no free oxygen in the atmosphere. Okay. In the beginning, remember evolution, Urey Miller's experiment? When they created Earth-like conditions, did they use any oxygen in that chamber?
No, sir.
There was no oxygen, free oxygen O2 in the, even if it was very, very low, very, very low. Okay. Today, like we have 21% oxygen. Even 4% or 5% of oxygen is toxic to anaerobes. So earlier, oxygen was a toxic substance for living systems when the living systems were anaerobic. But the problem is you can be anaerobic and you can continue to do glycolysis. So if you remember class 11th, you studied respiration, where glycolysis was the breakdown of glucose into pyruvate. And in that whole process, you don't use oxygen, right? You invest 2 ATPs and you get 4 ATPs out. So the net benefit is of 2 ATPs. So when you break one molecule of glucose, you get 2 ATPs. So if you break 10,000 glucose molecule, you get 20,000 ATPs. Okay. And this is how organisms used to survive when they first evolved, and they were all single-celled organisms. There was no concept of multicellularity. To maintain multicellularity, you have to do a lot of things between cells. First is cell-cell adhesion. Cells need to be in contact. So when a bacteria divides, at that moment, they both are in contact, but then they detach and does not remain in contact, because this acts as a free living bacteria. This acts as a free living bacteria. They live in colonies, but they're not tightly bound or they're not attached to each other. So in a multicellular organism, cells are attached to each other. They can signal each other. They can also provide something to each other. They can take up different functions, becoming different tissues, right? And all of this requires lots and lots of energy. That was not possible if every cell could just derive 2 ATPs from one glucose. It was only possible when mitochondria came and electron transport chain started. Okay. And anyone remembers how does mitochondria, what is the origin of mitochondria?
Can you repeat the question?
What is
It used to be like separate cells until like it was proposed
my question is,
anger.
yes, my question is, what is the origin of mitochondria for everyone? So yes, Matthew.
Yeah, so it was proposed that it used to be a separate cell because it has its own DNA and ribosomes. So
yeah, do you believe in that theory? Or it could just be a story, right? Someone just
Yeah, but it has some sense to it. So I think I do believe that. Sorry.
Yeah. So what's the sense? So more than sense, it should have proofs, right? So
Yeah.
when we that's what separates out logic from myth and mythology. So biology and mythology, if I tell you that the flagella of a bacteria, at the base of the flagella, there is a rotating protein that rotates like a motor. And if you actually see under the electron microscope, the structure of these proteins, and even the protein in our body that make ATPs, there is a ATP synthetase enzyme, and there is a ATP synthase protein machinery. So that whole machinery, which is present in the membrane of mitochondria, it rotates physically like a motor and takes one ADP and one phosphate. And when it rotates, it pushes one ATP and one phosphate so close together that it becomes an ATP and then releases it. So constantly it's doing a mechanical job. And it looks like it is a human made, the way we make motors, if you see an automated factory, a robotic arm will go and pick something and join it with something and rotate it and then send it, then take new things, right? That's where every creationist believe that, see, it is such a perfectly working system. How can it have evolved on its own? Just like we make robots, someone has made these molecules and all these fit them as in the form of a motor, and the shape is exactly like a human will think of a motor, because they don't go beyond that. And it's actually true. Biology seems like mythical magic at the very base level. The way you will see these Golgi bodies working, the membrane talking to each other. So one neuron, when it talks to another neuron, there is so much of intelligent molecule based signaling happening that your mind will be boggled and you will be thinking that it just cannot come up on its own. So it has to be created by someone. So that's how creationists use the same concepts of biology to keep their word forward. The whole idea was to tell you that how brilliant this is, and it requires a lot of energy. And the fact that all of it can come up on its own, you have to prove it. Because otherwise, if biologists also start saying things and creationists also start saying things, they all are basically at the end just arguing in a debate. So one thing is, creationists cannot prove the point of creation, because that cannot be proven, to be very honest. Biologists can prove at least what they are saying. So if they are saying that the mitochondria at one time was a free living organism, which later on was engulfed by a bigger cell and it started living inside that bigger cell, first as a parasite, and then eventually there was a mutualism established, then you prove it. Don't just tell me stories. Now the proof is one thing that you said, one proof lies in its own DNA. If mitochondria is not any alien thing which entered into the cell, and it is a part of the cell itself, and it was created inside the cell itself, then it having its own DNA does not make sense, because we know that the DNA of the cell, the genetic material of the cell, should be in the nucleus, right? No other organelle has its own DNA. Other organelles have RNAs like ribosomes, but RNA is transcribed from DNA and DNA is still sitting in the nucleus, right? So the gene is in the nucleus. So you see that there is only one code for the cell, which has been made to sit in the center in the nucleus, and everything comes from it. Makes sense. But then mitochondria comes up with its own DNA. Now you can still argue with the biologist that that doesn't prove that mitochondria was once a free living organism. It could still come from maybe some part of our own DNA got broken and came out and got inside the mitochondria, or something happened. How can you say that it's a free living organism? Then you sequence the mitochondrial DNA. And when you sequence the mitochondrial DNA, you will be amazed to know, people were amazed to know that, yes, the mitochondrial DNA is not similar to a eukaryote. The mitochondrial DNA is similar to a prokaryote DNA. It very much looks like a bacterial genome carrying very few genes. And all those genes are not present in the cell's nucleus DNA. So these are separate genes. They don't come from the cell's nucleus. So that is one proof that can say that, okay, this DNA did not originate into the cell from our own DNA. Otherwise, there would be similarity between a mitochondrial DNA and a genomic DNA, correct? Do you agree? Is it a baseline proof enough? Am I audible, people?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you understood what I said? That their DNA is not just their DNA, it's different from the genomic DNA of the cell. Okay. And second thing is that it is double membranous. Okay. So if you will look at the composition of these membrane, you will see that the inner membrane not just can tolerate oxygen, but can also use oxygen and create energy, break down biomolecules and create energy. That is exactly what this mitochondria as a free organism was also doing. But a bigger cell could not have done it. So when it engulfed mitochondria and over millions of years of symbiotic relationship, when they started living together, what mitochondria does for the cell is to give it lots and lots of energy. What the cell does for a mitochondria is to protect it from other predatory unicellular organisms and also provide it a habitable zone with less fluctuating environment. So it provides it with everything that mitochondria needs for its repair, wear and tear and everything. And mitochondria provides the cell with energy. So it's like a symbiotic relationship. Okay, but now it is an organelle of the cell. So we don't read it as a symbiotic relationship, but at one point of time it was. Okay, so similarly, oxygen is toxic. Coming back to the main point, oxygen was toxic to life. Now, again, it could be a story, right? Someone just came up with this theory that, oh, oxygen is toxic. Prove it. So we can prove it same. All the life on Earth has adapted and evolved to tolerate 21% oxygen. If you give pure oxygen to any organism, whether it can grow in the presence of oxygen, oxygen leads to breakdown. It in chemistry, you have read about this reaction called combustion. Have you read about combustion, people? Combustion reaction?
Yes.
What happens in combustion reaction? It's an oxidative breakdown of living components, right?
Yes,
Burning
mostly done by heat.
Oxygen. Heat is a byproduct. To burn anything, oxygen is required. You cannot burn anything in space. There is no oxygen in space. You cannot burn anything by like keeping it enclosed in a chamber where you give every gas. You give CO2, nitrogen, you give all gases, but you do not give oxygen. You will not be able to burn organic matter. And this can very simply be proved by an experiment. You light a candle, keep a glass on a candle. Okay, the candle after some time will extinguish. The candle is there, the fire is there. What happened? The oxygen in that enclosed space got used up. So you can no longer burn in the absence of oxygen. Okay, cool. So it is, and still in our system also, if we send pure oxygen to the lungs or we inhale pure oxygen, which is 100% oxygen, you cannot breathe. Your lungs will get, your tissues will get combusted and like there'll be damage. That's called oxygen toxicity. So every organ in our body is susceptible to oxygen toxicity. We cannot tolerate oxygen more than the atmospheric level in which we have evolved. Okay, at one point of time, this oxygen is assumed to be higher. So during the period when every organism used to be very big, even plants used to be very big, this is a theory which people are trying to prove now by experiments, that why the dinosaurs, or why during the Cretaceous period or before the Cretaceous period in the Triassic, everything was so big. Even the dragonflies were 1 meter big. Now the dragonflies are just 1 or 2 inches or 3 inches. Even the biggest organism present today on the earth, which is a blue whale, it will be very small as compared to the organisms which were present, like pelycosaurs or diplodocus, which were present in the reptilian era. So why those organisms were so big, and what happened that now we do not have any organism bigger than on land, bigger than a African elephant, or in water bigger than a blue whale? So what happened? So what happened is, at one point of time, the atmospheric oxygen level was very high, which got reduced due to spontaneous reactions that took place. But again, it's a story, it's a theory, so you have to prove it. So now evolutionary biologists are trying to prove it by using model systems and culturing them slowly in a generational manner over higher and higher oxygens, and see that if their overall size increases. And that has been proven in many points, like bacterial sizes increase in high oxygen, and there are some research that points in that direction, that yes, this could be a correct theory, and it's proven, it's accepted in the field. But still I will say that some more evidence will, because I'm also not very well, what do you say, I have not read the latest literature in the field, but I know that these kind of experiments are ongoing to prove this theory. Similarly, there were experiments to prove every theory. Unless and until it is proved, it is not accepted as a acceptable theory. So there's another myth in society in general. So when you study science, you go out and you talk about these theories, because the word theory means not, something which has not been practically proven yet. That's not true. So theory means when you give a hypothesis, you can only give it in theory, right? You can only write it or speak it. When you go, because at that time, maybe there is no technology to do that. So when you go, for example, theory of abiogenesis, it was proven by Urey Miller back, but still we will not call it practical of abiogenesis. It will still be a theory, but it is proven with facts. For example, theory of evolution. So people say that it's a theory, it's a story, it has no proof. It has proofs, but we will still call it a theory or a theorem. Okay, a theory or theorem or axiom. In mathematics, you read about these things, right? Postulate, theory, axiom, the difference between all, I hope. I remember I studied it in schools. So always be critical of science. Do not accept anything which is just written or said, and also the otherwise. When there are enough facts, do not be blindfolded to the facts, but yes, critique the facts. The facts may also make sense, but may not be facts. For example, a very common myth in society, and I'm sure that we all must have heard about it at one point or the other, is that we get vitamin D from the sunlight, right?
Yes, sir.
We don't get vitamin
Yes,
D
sir.
from the sunlight. Okay, it's a myth. The sunlight provides our skin cells the required energy to make a chemical reaction happen, due to which a molecule that transfers the important raw products and the enzymes that are required for the formation of vitamin D, that energy from the sun helps in that. Okay, and because sun has a spectrum of radiations, it's the easiest way to bask in the sun and get your skins exposed to the sun to get that energy. It does not give vitamin D to us. Okay, so if anyone is deficient of vitamin D, it can just take those preformed supplements from outside as a vitamin, like as a supplement of calcium and vitamin D, and it works. So it makes sense, because even doctors say that, you have deficiency of vitamin D, so you sit in the sun, you will get vitamin D. So this word "get" is very misleading. You should say you will form vitamin D in your body due to sunlight. Okay. Okay, so is decomposition clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. The third component is energy flow. And in energy flow, we will be talking about whatever the producers produced, it has to flow through a nutrition, a trophic level. Okay. So as the first line says, except for the deep sea hydrothermal system, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems. So what is the source of energy for deep sea hydrothermal ecosystem? The hint is here in this word. So it is true, if you go very deep in the sea, you will not get any sunlight. Howsoever intense the sun is shining on the surface, the sunlight cannot penetrate to the bottom of the sea. It's not possible for the sunlight to go there. So how are the organisms which are living at the bottom of the sea getting energy? You need to get energy to produce anything, right? So what do you think potentially can give energy?
By the other organisms.
Where are the other organisms getting energy from?
No, the organisms which are at a little higher depth of the sea.
So why will they go to the deep sea to get eaten by these organisms?
Fair enough.
Right? Organisms are not fool, right? Yeah. So let me tell you, there is something which is very hot above. There's also something which is very hot below. The core of the earth is a molten hot place, right?
Yeah.
So earth is basically like an egg. So the shell is the only solid part, the crust. And the crust is only some 64 kilometers wide, thick. If you go beyond 64 kilometers, you will enter the molten magma, which is your mantle. So there is crust, mantle, and the core. The core is molten. That is called the geothermal energy. Geo means earth, therm means heat, geothermal means the heat of the earth. So apart from the sun, there is something very hot sitting inside the earth, which is the molten core. So earth basically is, when it was formed, again, it could be a theory. So what are the proofs? So the proofs are volcanoes. Volcanoes, when they burst, they spew out molten, liquid, hot metals. So these are rocks and metals so hot that they melt, right? When the lava comes out and it solidifies as a stone, right? We call it igneous rocks. So who's boiling it inside the earth? Correct? That's the question. So then came the theory. How was earth formed? Now earth must have formed from very hot liquid that's just by the sheer force of gravity started accumulating together. And when it was formed, it was a hot molten ball. And just like any other hot molten ball, if you melt iron and cast a ball of it, you will see the same phenomena, that the ball starts cooling down from the outside. Or for that matter, anything which is hot and molten and upon cooling can become solid, wax or anything, it cools down in the same way. That is law of nature. So when earth was molten, it started cooling down from outside. When it cooled enough, then the crust became solid. Now again, the question is, how should I believe that the crust is solid and inside is liquid? So you should believe it because we have tectonic plates. So earth is not stable, the crust is actually floating over that molten mantle and core. How to believe that the earth is floating? Now we have technology. So satellite images have shown that Japan shifts around 6 inches every year towards the Asian main mainland. Now 6 inches every year, can we actually measure it, or is it just a story? We can actually measure it, and we can measure actually even centimeters of differences in elevation or latitudinal differences between any bigger bodies on Earth from the satellites, because they are very, very sensitive machines. So we have proved that Earth is floating. That's how mountains are formed when two tectonic plates come together and push against each other. The only obvious thing that can happen is when you push your fingers like this, the fingers tends to go up, right? This is how mountains rise. Again, it can be just a story, but the proof is the youngest mountain, where the collision has happens the latest, are the tallest. Himalayas are the youngest formed mountain ranges. That's why they are also the tallest peaks. Over time, the mountains also wear and tear. So everything has a reason. Everything can be logically described. If it cannot be, then it's not science, right? Or we do not have enough technology or enough abilities to prove it. Okay. Anyways, so the organisms deep inside the sea get their heat from these hydrothermal vents. So when something is hot, it would always like to expand, but there is no space to expand because as you go up, things are solidified. So what will happen when a trapped heat would like to expand, but there is solid on top of it? How many of you have baked a cake in an oven? If you have done science, some geothermal science. So if there is, you have, okay. So if at the core I keep a chocolate and there is a dough, what happens when I heat that chocolate?
It rises up.
What rises up?
The dough.
The dough. And if I continue heating it, then what will happen?
Chocolate.
Chocolate will also rise.
It will explode.
Poof, yes, it will explode and chocolate will come out. So you have actually on a miniature scale, not just baked a tasty recipe, but also have done science and proved how volcanoes are formed on Earth. Never thought about it, right? Next time you bake a chocolate lava cake, there's a reason why it's called chocolate lava cake, because it comes out as a lava. So if you heat a chocolate lava cake in the oven or in a microwave too much, then it will spew out, breaking that boundaries of the bread, because there is a liquid inside getting hotter and hotter and wants to expand. So it will make cracks in that solid thing. Similarly, the molten lava makes crack inside the earth crust and comes out. These cracks are called fissures, and these fissures are at multiple places present inside our deep seas. So they keep sending heat out, and that is how the deepest waters get their heat energy. Okay, and the primary producers there trap that heat energy and do the same production that the primary producers on the surface do by the sunlight. Make sense, people?
Yes, sir.
So
Yeah.
they can photosynthesize.
They
The
can thermosynthesize. Photo is for light. They thermosynthesize. Thermo is for heat.
But will they be green?
Will they be? No, they may or they may not be. They may not be green then. That's why deep sea organisms are pigmentless. They don't have pigments. If you go very deep, you will find jellyfishes and these kind of organisms. Sometimes these organisms produce their own light. You know, I'll tell you a very interesting fact. We know less about our deep sea life. So it is said that we know about 10 to 20% of our solar system, but we just know less than 5% of our deep sea life. And there is a reason for it. It is easier to go to space than it is to go to the deepest point on the Earth's ocean. Can anyone think why? It may sound bizarre to you, but that's true. It's very difficult to go to the deepest trench, the Mariana Trench, but it's easier comparatively to go in space. That's why we have explored space, we have explored moon. By robots, we have explored Mars. We have also sent robots to Jupiter, Saturn, even to Pluto and outside our solar system. But we have not been able to explore our own ocean bed on the earth. And one of the reason is the crushing pressure at the bottom. So there is so much of pressure of water in the bottom that any normal, so submarines also have a limit to which limit they can go down. Beyond that limit, they will not be able to survive. It is said. Have you ever thought that if I just take a vessel and send it inside the ocean, what is the problem? The problem is at such a high pressure from outside, you need equal pressure from inside to maintain and not crush under the weight of that ocean pressure. And that is too much inside at the deepest trench. That's why. Okay. And also you need enough oxygen that you have to carry for humans. So even divers cannot dive beyond a limit. If they try to dive beyond a limit, they will just get used of all the oxygen and they will just drown. But in space, it's easy. You can compress the gas, because space, it's opposite. There is no pressure coming out from outside. There is pressure coming from inside where you are. So you can maintain that pressure. And luckily, humans survive at 1 atmospheric pressure. It is very easy to maintain 1 atmospheric pressure. Whereas when you go deep inside the oceans, there can be 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 atmospheric pressures coming from the outside. Okay. Do you understand, people?
Yes.
Some things are very simple, but they're not very simple, right? So that's why. So in the deep sea, we get hydrothermal energy from the Earth's core. But we will not talk about that because it's a very complex ecosystem and we ourselves don't know much about it as scientists. So we'll focus on the ecosystem which is on outside, which is dependent on sun. So of the total sunlight or sun radiation, solar radiation that comes on Earth, less than half of it is used, okay, by the primary producers. And that is called photosynthetically active radiation or PAR, PAR. So this PAR is important for the plants and the bacteria to fix on the carbon dioxide and do photosynthesis. So you understand what is PAR?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think we discussed before also that some of our plants do not need that intense light energy. Plants have adapted to use just a fraction of the sunlight and still grow the best. The best example is your ornamental plants that you keep inside your houses. They almost never get sunlight, but they still grow very, very good just by the ambient light of your house, right? So that light is enough. And the light, our light bulbs and our tube lights, they also contain a spectrum of radiation energy, and that is enough for some household plants to grow. Okay, the opposite will happen. If you will keep these plants, which grow very well in house light, artificial light conditions, into a direct sunlight in a very hot country, these plants will die. Okay, if you take a plant of Europe, which is a native plant of Europe, which grows very high in cold areas where there is no sunlight, and you try to grow it in a place like Africa or South India or Sri Lanka or close to equator, those plants will not survive. Okay. So 50% of the solar radiation is taken by the plants, but the plants cannot capture all. So if you see this line, the plants can capture only 2 to 10% of the PAR. So which means what of the total? 50% of total is PAR. So what is 2% of PAR? It's actually 1% of the total. So 1 to 5% of the total sunlight. Do you understand? So this line is with respect to PAR. And the question that came in the NEET was, plants capture only -% of the total solar radiation. So this line, because students remember 2 to 10. Oh yes, 2 to 10 was in our textbook, but 2 to 10 of the PAR, which is 50% of the total. So which means 1 to 5 of the total sun. Just write it here only. Plants only capture 1 to 5% of the total incident solar radiation. Okay. And as you know that, how many of you have studied the second law of thermodynamics? No one remembers second law of thermodynamics, people? How many laws are there for thermodynamics? Okay, you need to revise that, okay? Go back, I'll ask the question again in the next class. So now let me quickly leave this part for the next class. I want you to go back and read. I think through that only you can at least go back and read thermodynamics. So the homework for today is to go back, and a thermodynamics chapter, if I'm not wrong, is in your syllabus from two perspectives, chemistry and physics both, right?
It was in 11th class.
So, okay, so you don't want me to give 11th class homeworks? Okay, it's cool, but for your entrances, it's important.
So
okay?
we can do it.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Go back and just quickly brush it up. Don't just put your whole day or 1 hour or 2 hours into reading that. Just look at what were the laws, okay? How many laws were there and what it basically said, okay? And we'll discuss it in the next class briefly. So what energy flow means is this. So from grass, which is a producer, a primary plant, it's eaten by herbivores, which is a primary consumer, and that it's eaten by a man, let's say, which is a secondary consumer, okay, as meat. Now this flow of energy was first described like this: producer to primary consumer, primary to secondary, then someone added tertiary consumer where man was not in between. So grass, goat, and then you say something that eats goat, but that then there's something that, let's say, even if a tiger is there, so tiger has the capacity to eat man also. So there will be a tertiary consumer. So this kind of a simple system is called the grazing food chain. There are two types of chains, GFC and DFC, detritus food chain. So what is more logical in nature, in reality, is this DFC. Okay. DFC begins with the dead organic matter. So here you do not start with production. Here you start with what died. So what died got decomposed and came back to primary producers. Then primary producers took those nutrients along with sunlight and produced, which was taken by the primary consumer, taken by the secondary consumer. Then again it died, and detritivores broke it down. Now you can ask me a question that even grass die, goat die. It's not necessary that the tertiary component will die. Others can also die, right? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So basically that's true. So DFC is not simple. It's not linear. From every level, there will be a chain coming back to the producers. So grass can die and decompose and can be used by another growing grass as nutrient. Goat can also die and the same thing can happen. Okay, same goes with human. So you have to read. So let me stop